Hello, I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for joining me for this extended edition of I-24 News. We begin here in Israel with the army to set up anti-missile defence systems at 20 strategic areas around the country as the threat from Hezbollah grows. According to a report in the London-based magazine Jane's Defence Weekly, the military is also looking to install more aircraft hangars, which would include the construction of more runways, service roads and other related facilities at a cost of around $10 million. This as Israel's military believes that the next war on the northern border will not just be confined to the area shared with Lebanon, but also with Syria. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came out to say a short while ago in a meeting with French cabinet members that it's very important that France and the other European countries do exactly what Argentina has done recently to declare Hezbollah a terrorist organisation, adding that it's the main terrorist organisation in the Middle East and around the world, and it must be done immediately.
I think it's very important that France and the rest of Europe do exactly what Argentina did recently, and that is to declare Hezbollah as a terrorist group. It's the major terrorist organization in the Middle East and in the world, and it's operating terrorists on European soil. So the most important thing is to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, and I think that should be done immediately.
Now to Israeli politics, and threats are flying thick and fast between a former Prime Minister and fresh candidate in the country's next elections and the UK Daily Mail publication. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's formed a new political party for the upcoming race, says that he will sue the newspaper for defamation after it linked him with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Daily Mail published pictures of him entering Epstein's New York residence in January 2016. Around the same time, several young women tied to the billionaire also came by. Here's some of what Barak had to say on the matter just a short while ago.
These things are lies. Over the past 24 hours, we've seen despicable acts. A despicable blood libel and totally baseless. Spilling blood, which is not surprising. For over 25 years, we've been living in a toxic environment. Whoever gets in the way of Netanyahu and his extremists in their attempt to get into power becomes a target of incitement, lies, is called a traitor, and worse.
And for more on this story, let's now go to our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman, who was at a rally for Ehud Barak in Tel Aviv. Owen, thanks for joining me. Firstly, tell me, what are you hearing there in regard to this drama between Barak and the Daily Mail publication? Tell me, how much of a case does he really have?
Well, Sarah, it's a great question. Ehud Barak coming to this event tonight here at a bar in Tel Aviv, giving an energetic defense against those insinuations in the British tabloid Daily Mail that he might have been present at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion on a day when young women were there, although we should say not necessarily minors. You know, Ehud Barak's lawyers in Britain fired off a letter to the Daily Mail today threatening a defamation case against them. And there were a couple sentences that stood out to me, again, as a trained lawyer, where they say, at best, your conduct was naive and irresponsible, and at worst, you purposefully and maliciously were defaming my client. Sarah, in plain English, what that says is maybe we have a case and maybe we don't. Maybe all you did was being naive and irresponsible, and maybe you actually maliciously defamed Ehud Barak. But of course, this isn't just an issue of law. This is an issue of politics. Ehud Barak, in some sense, is fighting for his political life with a party that is barely above the electoral threshold to even make it into Israel's parliament, trying to position that party for a merger with other parties on the Israeli center-left or left ahead of those elections. I should say, Sarah, this was a very, very energetic event. This room was absolutely packed. Organizers said there were 250 to 300 people waiting outside to get in. In politics, there's a saying, small rooms, big crowds. That's advice that Ehud Barak took tonight.
And tell me, Owen, what else has come out of this rally? How much support does he have there tonight?
Well, listen, again, a lot of energy. I spoke with some of the people here. They weren't necessarily activists in the party, all of them, but Tel Avivis who were curious that, in fact, two of the people I spoke with actually voted in the April elections for the party of Moshe Feiglin. Again, that libertarian, but also right-wing or even far right-wing leader who caught fire among a certain segment of hipster Tel Avivis. And it's interesting that they are now coming around potentially to supporting a 77-year-old former Israeli prime minister. And Sarah, this bar that I'm standing in is a hipster hangout in the middle of Tel Aviv. Ehud Barak very consciously trying to aim and target a younger demographic.
All right, Owen Alterman there in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for the update. Staying in the region, and a number of bushfires are burning in Israel today, with temperatures peaking at over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, whipping up hot winds throughout most of the country. A number of homes have been evacuated, with flames engulfing buildings in central Israel, with one man treated for smoke inhalation. Residents in the West Bank settlement of Shavei Shomron have also been told to leave, with a fire burning there. Now to a developing story, and drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman has been sentenced to life in prison, plus another 30 years on the back of that. In February, the 62-year-old former Sinaloa cartel head was found guilty on 10 charges, including drug trafficking and money laundering. Now, El Chapo escaped prison in Mexico back in 2016, but was later arrested and extradited to the United States. Ariel Hickson has more from New York.
Here in New York, Joaquin Guzman, the convicted Mexican drug lord, also known as El Chapo, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He addressed the judge today, talking about his torturous prison conditions, as well as the claim that he was denied a fair trial.
This case was simply an inquisition. It was a show trial, and how it ended is exactly perfect for that description, in that it didn't make a difference what the jury saw, what they said, what they discussed, what they voted on. At the end of the day, all that mattered was the government's evidence, no matter how flawed it may have been, no matter how many lunatics and sociopaths and psychopaths that it depended on. All that mattered was the evidence, and the jury be damned.
He's expected to live out his sentence at a maximum security facility in Colorado, where no prisoner has escaped since it first opened in 1994. In New York, I'm Ariel Hickson for I-24 News.
Now to the UK, and more than 60 Labor peers have taken out a newspaper advertisement accusing party leader Jeremy Corbyn of failing the test of leadership amid the ongoing anti-Semitism row. The full-page advert published in The Guardian criticises Mr Corbyn for a toxic culture allowed to divide the movement, saying that it's prompted the resignation of thousands of members. The party, it says, is no longer a safe place for its members and supporters, adding, "We are saying you are accountable as leader for allowing anti-Semitism to grow in our party and presiding over the most shaming period in Labor's history." Now, the ad is supported by a total of 67 Labor members of the House of Lords, including Peter Hain, Peter Mandelson and Robert Winston, and comes after a damning report by the BBC into the party's handling of allegations of anti-Semitism. Labor denies the claims and has written a complaint to the BBC. Here's Corbyn and Prime Minister Theresa May trading barbs.
Mr Speaker, this party opposes racism in any form whatsoever in our society. And coming from a Prime Minister who encouraged the hostile environment, sent go-home vans around London and deported British citizens, which he's now had to compensate them for, I think she might look to her own party and her own government's records as well.
The real disgrace is his handling of racism in the Labour Party. Activists protesting, MPs leaving, staff resigning. What would his great heroes of Attlee, Bevan and Ben think? Look what he has done to their party. We will never let him do it to our country.
And we're going out for a short break, but when we come back, we'll tell you if a solution has been found to get Russia to push Iranian forces out of Syria. All of that and much more when we come back. Stay with us.
Michael, what happened to TV news?
Hell of a first question. You're trying to shoot the stand-up, and the guy comes behind you, and he's yelling Baba Booey.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, or worse than that.
Steve, did you kill Elvis?
The world thought I was Jack the Ripper.
Whether you're just getting out of bed or starting your day, or you're already hard at work, we cut through the clutter to give you the right dose. Breaking news and top headlines from Israel, the Middle East, and around the world. Politics, pop culture, sports, and music. We track the big stories from the heart of the Middle East. Brace yourself for your daily dose of news.
The Middle East. I-24 News is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the I-24 News app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. I-24 News, see beyond.
On Stateside, it's not just about delivering the news. It's about giving meaning to the news and doing so with clarity.
These families waiting to get into the country, how long will they be in detention?
Fact-based journalism, live breaking news, and stories right from where they happen.
This is Zimbabwe's Berlin Wall moment.
Because what happens around the rest of the world can have a huge impact on the United States, and what happens in the United States can have a huge impact on the rest of the world. That's Stateside.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's go back now to our top story from here in Israel, with the army to set up anti-missile defence systems at 20 strategic areas around the country as the threat from Hezbollah grows. And for more on this story, let's bring in our defence correspondent Daniel Semach, who is standing by in Tel Aviv. Daniel, what more can you tell us about this? Tell me, how great really is this threat on Israel's northern front?
Well, Sarah, it's widely considered to be Israel's most dangerous front when it comes to the ultimate threat there. Not necessarily the most active or the most volatile on a day-to-day basis. That might be the southern front. But in regards to the northern front, when you're looking at Hezbollah, you're looking at a group that's turned from guerrilla really to an army. And that army now has a weaponry that Israel has to be prepared to deal with also in the future. Something that Israel maybe have not been battle-tested against until now. That being more sophisticated missiles and rockets. As a result of their weapons arsenal, there being Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, Israel has decided indeed to deploy more Iron Dome batteries, to take more precautionary measures to ensure that the civilian home front is better protected. And as a result of that threat that we're seeing from the northern side, the Israeli military is taking numerous strides to further bolster its defenses, not only air defenses, but also bolstering aircraft hangars throughout Israel to protect Israel's most valued military assets. So we're seeing them taking strides in two different spheres, one in air defense, as well as bolstering some of Israel's more manufacturing facilities and protecting the merchandise that's inside there, that being Israeli aircrafts. Sarah?
And Daniel, you did mention the ongoing threat on Israel's southern border, and I understand you're at an event there in Tel Aviv to support farmers from the south, many of who've had their work disrupted due to that ongoing violence on the border. Tell me, what are people there telling you?
Well, Sarah, it's been a pretty positive atmosphere, actually. We've heard from not only farmers, but also other types of merchants, carpenters, jewelry makers, many different people from all different walks of life who are actually trying to send a different message here. Not one of violence, not one of rocket alert sirens, but one of hope and optimism. It's also an event that was attended to by one of Israel's ministers. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
First of all, we will put an end to the thing that wants to threaten the state of Israel. These are the attack tools whose sole purpose is to harm innocent civilians, women and children. That is the goal. Instead of accepting the money they receive from other countries and building hospitals, building industrial zones, they're digging tunnels with it. It is better to invest this money in food and medicine for people instead of complaining every day about a lack in this area. And we will also find a solution to the fires.
Okay, Daniel Semach there in Tel Aviv. Really appreciate that update. Now, with Russia calling the shots in Syria, Israel is constantly trying to persuade the Kremlin to push Iranian forces out of the war-torn country. Was a formula to do it found in a meeting in Jerusalem last month. I-24 News defence correspondent Jonathan Regev reports.
It's taken 3 weeks, but details are emerging of the agreements reached at a trilateral meeting in Jerusalem between the national security advisors of Israel, Russia, and the United States.
We have some ideas on positive steps that can be made and which could be made jointly by the states of the region after they are agreed upon by Russia, Israel, and the U.S.
According to the Israeli media, Israel and the U.S. are not just demanding that Iran pull out its forces out of Syria, they also want no Iranian presence in Lebanon, including no high-precision rocket factories Tehran is building for Hezbollah, and in return, the U.S. would lift the economic sanctions on Russia, first imposed due to the crisis in Ukraine. It sounds like a good deal for Moscow, but can it be delivered? Not so sure.
Iranians, they are not very reliable partners. I think that it will take Russia a lot of effort and pressure to make Iranians pull out of Syria.
The Islamic Republic, of course, has its own interests. Iran hopes to be part of Syria's reconstruction. This could bring much-needed cash to its dwindling economy, and Tehran also hopes that it could implement its Lebanese model in Syria. This means having proxies which pose a threat to Israel. It also means that in a future war, Israel might be attacked from 2 different fronts. But here Iran's interests clash with those of the Kremlin.
Russia is, of course, interested in pulling Iran out of Syria because it understands quite well that the influence of Iranian forces in this region, in Syria and Lebanon, they are not destabilizing the situation in the country.
How far will Russia go to achieve this? And will Iran resist Moscow's demands, so creating a conflict with the Kremlin? The Israeli media report says the first step of the trilateral agreement calls for the withdrawal of Iranian heavy artillery out of Syria. If we see that happen, we could expect further steps to come. Jonathan Regev, I-24 News.
Tomorrow marks exactly 25 years since a horrifying terrorist attack on a Jewish community office building in Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires. Argentina and the United States are now adding pressure to bring those responsible to justice. Our senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv reports.
The government of Argentina intends to make the 25th anniversary of this mass murder meaningful. On July 18, 1994, a suicide driver blew up a van filled with explosives, destroying the headquarters of the Jewish community known as AMIA, killing 85 people and wounding more than 200. Investigators feel certain that the Lebanese Shiite Muslim group Hezbollah, ordered by Iran, carried out this crime. Argentina's ambassador to the United States, Fernando Oris de Roa.
The pain will never cease. The wounds cannot be completely healed. But impunity makes it a lot worse.
Argentina this week will put Hezbollah, which is now part of Lebanon's government, on a list of terrorist organizations. Despite protests in Buenos Aires, officials there had seemed hesitant for years to name those responsible for the 1994 bombing and for another blast that leveled the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992, killing 29 people. Prosecutor Alberto Nisman was murdered 4 years ago by killers who tried to make it look like suicide, an obvious cover-up. Argentina's president, Mauricio Macri, elected in 2015, seen here with President Trump, now declares that justice must prevail and that 6 named suspects, including Iranian officials, should surrender. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be in Buenos Aires this week for the 25th anniversary of the Jewish community headquarters bombing and a conference on fighting terrorism in the Western Hemisphere, aiming to amplify pressure on Iran and its proxies.
We'll continue to seek ways to block terrorist travel and cut off the flow of money to these groups. We'll also be making some additional announcements in Buenos Aires. so stay tuned.
The State Department's top official on counterterrorism, Ambassador Nathan Sales, honors the 85 victims who were killed this week in 1994.
They were Catholic and Jewish. They had families, they had children, and they had friends. They had plans for the future, which for them never came.
The U.S. claims progress in improving international cooperation to block Iran and Hezbollah involvement in smuggling, drug dealing, and more violent conspiracies in South America. Dan Raviv, I-24 News, Washington.
And for more on this story, let's bring in the anchor of our Spanish show, News 24, Damien Pachta. Damien, thanks for joining me. Tell me, what are the local reactions that we're hearing today following this executive order being published?
Of course, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign, so there are major reactions from the entire political spectrum, but above all, there's a reaction by the Arab community in Buenos Aires, deeply rejecting the steps taken by President Macri administration, which possibly will name Hezbollah as a terror organization. For now, it didn't happen yet, but we are likely to hear about it in the next 24 hours.
And tell me, how much of a significant change is this this order for the judicial process in, really coming out knowing the truth?
For years, during the Kirchner administration, Argentina was aligned with Iran. They even signed a memorandum of understanding between the two countries. And now it's a significant shift in the foreign policy of Argentina, more close to the United States, more close to Israel, and it's also going to involve exchange of information in order to prevent terror activities in the region.
All right, Damien Pachta, always a pleasure. Thank you. The US Supreme Court has become a key ideological battleground between conservatives and liberals during the Trump era, with the former now holding that majority. Now, that could mean upsetting many of the court's progressive precedents, and a man who played a key part in creating those, former Justice John Palau Stevens, has died at 99. Terry Moran has more on his life and legal legacy.
This morning, the nation is celebrating the life of retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, who died in Fort Lauderdale after suffering a stroke on July 15th, was named to the court by President Gerald Ford back in 1975. Times were different. Stevens was confirmed by the Senate 98-0. Can't imagine that kind of bipartisanship today. He was the third longest-serving justice in our history, 35 years, up until 11 days before his 90th birthday in 2010. He was replaced by Elena Kagan. In a statement for the court, Chief Justice John Roberts says the retired justice brought to our bench an inimitable blend of kindness, humility, wisdom, and independence. When he got to the High Court, Stevens sided with conservatives. By the time he left, he was considered a liberal firebrand. He was a World War II veteran and passionately opposed the idea that the First Amendment protects flag burning, and early on he found the death penalty constitutional. But he did change his mind on that, siding with liberal justices concluding that capital punishment is unconstitutional. Stevens spoke about his decision in a 2014 interview with George Stephanopoulos.
You would define it basically as cruel and unusual punishment.
Yes, I would think the sooner we get rid of the death penalty, the better it would be.
He also became a reliably liberal vote on abortion, education, and the separation of church and state. He was fierce in dissent, never more than in his scathing dissent in Bush versus Gore in 2000. Stevens writing that he feared the decision in that case to stop the Florida recount would undermine the nation's confidence in the courts, an opinion he never let go of. Writing in his memoir that came out earlier this year, I remain of the view that the court has not fully recovered from the damage it inflicted on itself. And overnight, the tributes are pouring in. The President and First Lady sending their condolences in this statement, adding the retired justice was known for his humility, legal acumen, and affection for his beloved Chicago Cubs. His work over the course of nearly 35 years on the Supreme Court will continue to shape the legal framework of our nation for years to come. The Chicago Cubs posting to Twitter, honoring the Chicago native and Cubs fan.
Is there one decision you're most proud of?
I really don't know the answer, because there are a lot of them that I am quite proud of, and there are others I'm sure I could have done better on. All I can say is I did the best I could.
We'll leave you now with a developing story, and 3 people are dead, including a Turkish diplomat, following a shooting at a restaurant in the Iraqi Kurdish city of Erbil just a little earlier today. Turkey's foreign ministry releasing a statement saying this afternoon an official of our consulate general in Erbil has been martyred as a result of an attack while he was outside our consulate compound there. Now, they're vowing to take strong measures against the perpetrators and retaliating. Police are investigating with no claim yet as to who is behind that attack. And that is all we have time for this edition of I24 News, but we will continue to bring you all of the breaking stories. So do go ahead and visit us online. That's i24news.tv. And we have all of those stories on all of our social media platforms. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.